It's a nice sunny day, isn't it? Let's talk about domestic violence.
Domestic violence affects women from all walks of life, mothers, wives and daughters.
I'm sure it's not just women it affects. It's interesting how that's worded, isn't it? Notice how the language is used so that it's women. You can already hear in the vocabulary, can't you, that this isn't about looking at somebody's behaviour and thinking, is it a good or bad behaviour? This is women. This is based on sex, not people's behaviour. And I think one of the things that we've got to do is get out of the frame of saying that women are victims of domestic violence, not mention men at all, and it be this male-hating, patriarchal view of men, like all men are bad and all women are victims. Shouldn't it be based more on the behaviour? If somebody hits you, they hit you, whether they're man or woman. If somebody's bullying you, they're bullying you. And it shouldn't be based on sex. It should be based on the individual's behaviour, not on the sex.
On average, 1 woman in 4 will be a victim of domestic violence. So, chief police officers have suggested setting up a register of convicted male offenders and men merely accused by 2 women or more of violent behaviour to help women avoid these relationships. Our last big question: should there be a domestic violence register?
Now, as I've said in another video, violent behaviour can just be inconvenient. So a text message can be considered as violent abusive behaviour. It's classed as molestation. Molestation means to inconvenience somebody. So you text somebody and they don't want you to text them. Or if you say, I don't want to talk about it, and say, well, can we talk about it later? I said, I don't want to talk about it. Now you're a molester.
Pat, you believe very much that there should. You think this is another weapon in the armoury. Lots of people are saying, but why should it just be men on the register? Why shouldn't violent women be on the register, for example?
Because the main perpetrators of domestic violence in our society are men. And the main victims are women.
Now this is Pat Craven. Pat Craven, you can type in Pat Craven on YouTube and she's got a series of cartoons which explain why men are bad and why women are victims. It's called the Freedom Programme. She sells it on her website as you can get a 3-day refresher course for trained facilitators.
It's time to meet the bully. He means to frighten us. This is how he does it. He sits in an aggressive way. Secret movements or actions like pointing. He paces up and down. He huffs and puffs. Or he speaks very quietly. He shouts.
So being a victim puts you in a very powerful position. And so what they've done is they've made the criteria so that instead of like punching someone, for example, or being physically violent, they've put the criteria so that even now if you just by you being in the room is causing me stress.
No one should suffer from abuse from a partner. Here is Mr. Wright playing at home with children while you get the chance to relax. Joins you in your favourite restaurant. He is wearing the suit he wore when you first met. Hopefully his fashion sense will improve over time. Mr. Wright cheerfully does his share of the household chores while you put your feet up without feeling guilty. If you need someone to talk to, Freedom Programme can help. Speak with one of our trained advisors today. Or visit freedomprogramme.co.uk. Take a look at our book, Living with the Dominator, available on Amazon.
A lot of women that apply for non-molestation orders in family court, again, molestation doesn't mean what you think it means. It's not about touching somebody else. Molestation is, in a family court setting, inconvenience. Oh, he annoyed me, he's bothering me. Oh, can't stand him. They hit you. They're still the victim. Because you annoyed them. That was emotional abuse. So, therefore, I can attack you. So there's a huge amount invested in the idea that if you become a victim of emotional inconvenience, you can do whatever you like to your partner. That's why the narrative is on women and it can't be on behaviour, because if you're looking at behaviour, you would identify women as the abuser for a lot of relationships. And I don't like that. I think it's doing exactly the opposite of what it's pretending to do. So now Pat's going to tell you why violent women shouldn't be on the register.
Lots of people are saying, but why should it just be men on the register? Why shouldn't violent women be on the register, for example?
Because the main perpetrators of domestic violence in our society are men.
So that doesn't answer the question, Pat. Can you see the ideology in her face? Because they're mostly men. So she's not actually answered the question. Notice how it's all about making sure that women are victims, because it's a women's rights feminist issue. It's not about looking at behaviour in general, whereby we're judging people based on their behaviour. This isn't about behaviour. This is based on sex.
And the main victims are women.
And I don't think that's actually true either. I think that the programmes that, like the ones that she sells, tell men that they have to behave in a certain way, and if they don't, the woman's going to be a victim. And so basically, you do as I say, else I'm going to be a victim, and therefore I can tell you what to do, because now I can get the court and police involved. So the way that these feminists get power and control is by becoming victims of things like inconvenience. I told him to do this, and he didn't do it, therefore I'm a victim. With a lot of women, they masquerade as a victim so that they can be the perpetrator. By being a victim, it gives them lots of power and control, especially in a family court.
I have received this news with delight, because I've been campaigning and trying to inform women and children about how abusive men operate, how to spot them, how to avoid them, and how to get over the effects.
Women and children, so not victims of domestic violence, which include men as well, from dangerous women, but women and children. Notice the terminology.
Freedom's Flowers is a book of first-hand accounts from women and children who have survived domestic abuse. You can buy it from Amazon anywhere in the world. The dominator, who has total control, has forced this child's mother to ignore him since he was a tiny baby, frequently separate very young children from their mothers by sending them to boarding school.
They've had on us and our children for 15 years. When I first started doing this, the idea that anyone would even think about having a register of abusive men was ridiculous.
We've come a long way, haven't we?
We didn't take it seriously. The courts didn't take it seriously. The government didn't. And I think that the fact that this debate is existing means that we are changing, we are learning, and things are improving.
But these are men merely accused. They haven't even been convicted of anything.
Does that harm them? I mean,
Yes, it does. It makes them homeless with occupation orders. You get put on a register whereby you've been accused of something that you haven't done just because of a malicious ex-partner. You don't get to see your children. A lot of men commit suicide because of the lack of purpose. I could go on, they're financially bankrupt. I could go on and on and on. Yes, it severely harms them, very much so.
if I meet a charming man and I go on the internet and find that he has actually accordingly abused two other women, what? I just can avoid him, can't I?
So let's say if a man's in bed and he's snoring, and she wakes up next to him and says, oh, that really annoys me, that's emotional abuse. Therefore, he can now go on a register for emotionally abusing. And there's two women on there. Oh, well, I can avoid, now other women can avoid. It's ridiculous. So two of his ex-partners don't like him. They annoy him. That's probably one of the reasons why they split up. Oh, he comes in here, just the way he breathes heavy. Oh, it just annoys me. She's a victim of domestic abuse. I'll put this on a register. Now, other women can be careful of his heavy breathing when he's snoring. One of her strategies is that if a guy comes up to you and he's nice, he's really nice, he's doing stuff for you, it's an act. He's just doing it so that he can control you. So even when a guy's nice, there's no... Unless you conform to the criteria that is set out by what they say you should act like, then you're a victim, and therefore you can exert power and control.
I'm not going to go around and burn his house down.
No, you just take it off of him, and his children, and his money, and his reputation.
When we women go on the Freedom Programme, sometimes we escape from the dominator. Women who have done this have told us how their lives have improved. We can leave the house whenever we want to. We now have a key. We can eat what we like, whenever we want to. They have bought us a car. Come and join us. To find a programme near you, give us a call.
Because although this register is a step in the right direction, if I've fallen in love, say, with you, I know you were on there. And who could blame me? Yeah. And you were on there. I'd say, Nick, you're on the register. And you'd say, my former partner was such a horrible woman.
I knew I'd say partner. You don't understand. She was a nightmare.
She probably was. Yeah, well, she might have been a horrible woman.
She was. She made me hit her as well, and I didn't want to. She made me hit her as well, and I didn't want to.
Well, that's a bit far-fetched.
You would give me short shrift for all that.
No, I wouldn't.
No, but you would if you were sensible. But there's an interesting psychological thing here. When you've just met somebody, are you in that psychological place, which means you're going to check them out because you might be excited by the relationship?
Well, I think, unfortunately, it's psychologically inconceivable that a woman who's just in the first blush of romance is going to go onto the internet. Now, I don't think it's going to be on the internet anyway. I think you would actually have to make an application to the police authority to be able to have information about this individual. But not only that, and more importantly, it's actually not going to keep women safe, because women are not going to use it. It's looking at things in the wrong way. It's not focusing on the real issues. If the government have got money to spend, then spend it on perpetrator programmes, spend it on counselling support for women and children.
Why does somebody have to be a perpetrator and somebody has to be a victim of emotional abuse? Do you understand? It's not about physical violence. If I annoy you, you're a victim of emotional abuse. If you annoy me, I'm a victim of emotional abuse. But only one person can be a victim and one person can be a perpetrator. That's why it's a battle to see who can be the biggest victim. Because whoever gets to be the biggest victim gets the most amount of legal aid, gets the most amount of government support, gets rehomed. And the perpetrator is destroyed.
It's just part of an arsenal. I mean, what I want everyone to do really is come on my freedom programme, and then they'll understand the issues.
But only
and
14
also use the register.
Only 14.
Look at her face. She's so happy because she makes huge amounts of money out of domestic violence. If domestic violence didn't exist, then she wouldn't make any money, which is why it has to keep existing, so it can get funding and people can keep buying my programmes. We all make judgments of people, and this whole idea of judging people based on their sex instead of their behaviour and their character is wrong. And the whole system is skewed towards, if you're a man, you're an abuser. It doesn't matter what you actually do, your behaviour is irrelevant. Men are inherently part of the patriarchal tyranny of our society, and they need to be gotten rid of. And us as victims need to get rid of them.
Your current husband, would you have checked him out on a register like this?
Never have crossed my mind, but I think that there's...
Why not?
Because I think that there's a scope for such incredible injustice with something like a register. You know, we talk about paedophile registry, and they've been an incredible tool in the arsenal, as you said, for quashing paedophile rings, which are organised crime. And that makes sense. But what we're talking about with domestic violence is one person against another. So it's one person's say against another. And so frequently, you can just see how two very angry ex-lovers could say, look, you know, he was very abusive in his verbal behavior. And remember that abuse in this register is also verbal abuse. You know, he was very verbally abusive. He put me down. I felt really quashed by him. And lo and behold, the man is ruined for life.
And that's the thing, is that she's made a very good point. What it's doing, it's criminalising being in a relationship with a woman. That's what it's doing. Because at any point she can just turn around and go, oh, I'm a victim of domestic abuse. He didn't agree with me. At the moment we're in 2020 and I would not dare live in a house with a woman. Because at any point she can just have me removed and I could be homeless. The whole idea of being in an intimate relationship is that you feel loved, you feel safe, you feel you know, that you're mates with somebody, and when a relationship deteriorates, you hope that there's some sort of a friendship there, and if not, and you have to go your own separate ways, there's a certain degree of respectability and amicability. And the trouble is that it's far too easy for people to just turn around and go, I'm a victim of domestic abuse because I'm upset and angry.
Because let's face it, you're on a register like that, it's like social services. You know, you are never, ever going to be able to be...
This is about violence, this register. This is about violence.
But we're talking about injustice. I mean, violence is horrible, but so is injustice. And the thought that somebody could be on a register and be blackballed for the rest of his life because somebody decided that they were going to have a vendetta is, I think, just too dangerous.
I can't really get across to you in this one video, I will explore this in other videos, just how powerful victims are and how dangerous victims are. If anybody's classing themselves as a victim, be very specific. What are you a victim of? Oh, domestic abuse. Yeah. What are you a victim of? Did he hit you? No. Did he say anything? Well, no, he didn't do this. And you go through the list. Well, what did he do? Oh, he annoyed me. Domestic abuse. It's been diluted, it's been saturated, so that now everybody can apply for domestic abuse, and we can get more funding so that we can get more victims and support more. And it's a growing problem that we need to sort out, because what you're doing is you're expanding the criteria for which you can apply for orders.
Yes, I mean, it's the basis, the statistical basis for all of this, which I would really want to question. Domestic violence is completely misrepresented. 40% of the victims of domestic violence are men.
Yeah, nobody likes to talk about that. In fact, depending on which statistics you look at, it's about half. And in fact, women are more like violent and aggressive than men. So it's about 60-40 or something. So it's about half each. So again, it's looking at individual behaviour. It's not about looking at sex.
This proposal for a register doesn't help that 40% of the victim group at all. It is only for female victims.
Well, it's 70% when it comes to incidents and convictions are women. You're talking about the unreported.
I'm talking about the figures from the most reliable source of all, which is the British Crime Survey, published by the Home Office. And year after year, it consistently shows 40% of victims of domestic abuse are men, 60% are women. And where there's such a very large, yes, it's a minority, but such a very large minority, there is no justification whatsoever.
Now look at her face. Look at her face. It's the same with that other woman in the other video, that they're they're possessed.
For having initiatives that only address the needs of the 60% who happen to be women.
Pat,
it's blatant.
You've got to come back on that. Then I'll come to the lady in red, just behind you.
I have to say that I don't agree with you, and there's no surprise to anybody watching. I don't agree with your figures. I don't agree with the statistics.
She doesn't agree with his figures or statistics. That's the whole... this is the thing, is that feminists don't actually have an argument.
My figures
And
are the Home Office figures.
I
They're
also
irrefutable.
want to go back to linking what you said, Christina.
But she doesn't want to talk about that. Well, I don't want to talk about statistics and figures. I want to go back to talking about what I want to talk about. We're going to go back to talking about how men are dickheads. Oh, Christina.
In that, I run the Freedom Programme for Women. I've run it for thousands of women who've come on our Freedom Programme. Most of them have been too ashamed and too afraid to tell anyone that they are victims of domestic violence, because most of us, when we are victims of domestic violence, we blame ourselves.
Well, if you've done something wrong, like hit your partner, then maybe you should blame yourself. But again, in this whole patriarchal system that the feminists set up, is that, and in family court, the judges will say, well, if a woman hits you, you annoyed her.
That's going to apply even more so to a male victim. A male victim is going to even be even more ashamed to actually admit that. So I think there's no good reason being given here as to why this register should not also cover male victims.
I'd like to just
Let's see what she's got to say now about the male victims.
come back to the male victims.
Wait, let's hear from Pat. Then I
Because
promise the lady
let's look
behind.
at the body count. We've got a woman killed every 3 days. That's 112 women a year are murdered by partners and former partners.
So she's talking about women again. She can't talk about men. She can't not talk about women are victims, women are victims, women are victims, women are killed, women are victims. What well, yeah, but some women are violent. Women are victims. Women are victims. It's this whole kind of, she's so aggressive. And like me, I'm coming across here as like very passionate and very physical because I'm trying to express a point because I'm performing to the video camera. But you can see in these feminists' face that they're bubbling, and that's why they don't regret, because when you make yourself a victim, you don't have to feel guilt or shame for all your violent behaviour.
The last Home Office figures I got were 22 men a year.
That's
There's
not
a hell of a
22 too many.
big gap.
That is not a reason. Nobody's saying don't do it for what we're saying is, why exclude female perpetrators? Why?
Okay, lady here, what would you like to say?
Why exclude female perpetrators, Pat?
Okay, lady here, what would you like to say?
Oh, it makes me so angry. The more ignorant and arrogant you are, the more you will be classed as a victim. This is why victims are dangerous people. And this is probably what I want to get across in this video, is that victims are very dangerous people. You want to be very careful about people that say, I'm a victim. What are you a victim of? Tell me. You've really got to find out, because victims get what they want and they have power and control, and they're really perpetrators masquerading as victims. Whereas genuine victims need to be taken care of. But these people pretending, and it is a huge, overwhelming amount of people pretending to be victims, usually because so that they can get money in housing.
I think domestic violence is unacceptable, whatever the sex of the perpetrator and the victim.
That's my point.
But also, I would take issue with you, Christina, because actually verbal abuse is also domestic violence.
The whole idea of verbal abuse is domestic violence just makes me sick. It makes me sick because what they do then is they put it down to the tone of voice. Oh, well, you were saying something nice, but it was your tone of voice. Like, it's so pedantic. And again, in order to be able to communicate with somebody, you have to be able to make mistakes. You can't just be in the same, I love you, oh my God, you're the best in the world. Communication is combative because people have different wants and needs, and even when they want the same thing, they have different strategies and ideas of how to get there. People communicate differently. There's cultural differences. It's amazing anybody gets on. And so we have to forgive each other for the fact that not everybody's always going to communicate in the preferred way that you would like to, and to acknowledge and accept and appreciate the fact that everybody's different and everybody has their own kind of truth in a way. But their truth isn't the truth. Like, just because they feel something doesn't make it true.
It destroys the person who's being put down, whether that's the man or the woman, it destroys them.
Ajmal, do you think there's a too broad a definition here of domestic?
I think the domestic violence that has been defined by Christina includes both verbal and physical abuse, as well as economic, of course. We should condemn it outright. We should ban such behaviour. But to create a register does open up a huge room for abuse, more, and injustice. Any law that contains injustice can't be a good law. For example, you've just said two people who have just merely made an accusation of a person and he has not been convicted could also be included in that register.
Because as I've said about in another video, there's two ways of expressing violence. One is overt, one is covert. One is in terms of physically, I'm going to do this to you and punch and threaten and all that kind of stuff. And then the other one is covert, which is, oh, he did something to me, and put them on a register. That's reputation destruction. The primary way in which women express aggression is through reputation destruction. And that's exactly what this register is going to do. It's going to destroy several men's reputations for no reason at all. Because somebody broke up with them, or because they didn't love them anymore, or whatever it was. It's so childish.
But I think justice must be at the forefront of it. Everyone must know that it is not acceptable. There should be a culture change, and more importantly, there should be a program to support all so that they don't do this and we end the cycle of violence all the way.
This whole idea of institutionalising intimate relationship is so sickening. It's the opposite of intimacy. When you're going out with somebody, you don't go and think, I'll go and see if they're on an abusers list. I want you to get from this video that what they've done, what the feminists have done, is they've criminalised being in intimate heterosexual relationships. because at any point in a relationship where somebody wasn't 100% happy, they were a victim of domestic abuse because they didn't get their own way.
Do you think this is a valuable tool?
I think my main issue about this is how on earth is this going to be conducted? It's not a conviction, we've agreed on that, it's an allegation. Yeah. You're looking at two sets of... by the way, I think ACPO have gone completely balmy. I think they've got not enough work to do as senior police officers to come up with this. But so two allegations are made about you. What are you going to do? You're clearly not going to be able to go online, because if you did go online, anybody could find out anything about anybody. So presumably you have to go to some department. And when you go to the department, what are you going to say to them? Say, look, I've been going out with X for how many months? Does she then have to prove it? Does she have to have a countersigned piece of paper by X to allow him to be checked? And if he won't give it, does that mean that there is a problem? Or is he just a freedom-loving person who's not going to give it?
Exactly. How is it going to be conducted? And how are you going to define being in a relationship? It used to be no sex before marriage, and people used to get married, and there used to be like structures in place for society so that you know who's who, and that really helped with paternity. So it's sort of like you know whose child is who, but even then it didn't always work. But there was some sort of a structure in place that society kind of adhered to, whereby this family and this family are going to merge together, and we know who's who and what's what. And nowadays, the whole idea of the pill and all the stuff that the feminists have brought along in the sexual revolution is great. You've got complete freedom, but at the same time it's complete, there's no boundaries, so anybody could be with anybody, and then all sorts of disease and allegations, and it gets really, really messy once you blur the lines between if two people are actually in a relationship or not. I've never experienced this actually, but I can see that it does happen. Is that people will be together for a bit, then they won't be together, then they're together again, then they're not, and they're on a very kind of semi-casual basis. And so I'm usually either with somebody or I'm not, and that's just how I live my life. But I've observed that other people kind of, oh, we were together and we're not, oh, we're not together, we're exclusive. And this is one of the things that people do, is they say, well, we're seeing each other but we're not exclusive. We're seeing each other but we're not official. We're unofficial but exclusive. And there's all these different terminologies, like this Maslow's hierarchy of relationships. And I have a very simplistic attitude. We're either in an intimate relationship, you know, having sexual relations, or we're not. And we're either doing it exclusively or we're not. We're seeing other people. And to keep it in that very binary way of looking at things really helps me navigate my intimate relationships. But that's my personal thing. But other people have a hierarchy of, well, I'm seeing this guy and I'm not seeing this other guy, and I see that guy when I go on holiday, and like, so they have multiple intimate relationships going on, but they're not letting the other people know about the other intimate relationships, and then they're together and then they're not, and all this kind of stuff. So you can be a victim of all these intimate relationships, and you can be the common denominator that's the violent kind of aggressive aspect to it, but yet you can get compensation from all these guys just by being in a relationship with them.
One of the terrible problems with domestic violence is women will not press charges. I don't know what men's statistics are, but women will not press charges. That woman who died, who was killed the other day, do you remember? Her hand was chopped off, she was killed, and twice she had called police in, and then they get there and she doesn't press charges against her partner.
Yeah, you see, when you talk about people's hands being chopped off, I mean, that's that's different to being annoyed by somebody snoring, isn't it? But yet the two are treated the same. It's not right.
Do it again and again. The men who do it. That's what Pat argues.
Men who think they can touch a woman and physically be violent or be verbally abusive, or even a woman for that matter, they need complete re-education, they need different training, they need to be rehabilitated into normal civilized world. You put them on the register, it's not solving the problem. You creating all sorts of barriers in the society would help, but register is not going to help.
I think you've got to help kind of reintegrate people into society that think it's okay to hit other people. But in a family court, perpetrators, female perpetrators, mothers, are protected. So again, they get what's called a undertaking. So with the undertaking, they can be violent, and then they make an undertaking to the court that they won't do it again, and then they can be violent again, and then they just make another undertaking. It's not, there's no consequences to their actions. The family court is private, so nobody ever, she never, it's not the fact that she doesn't get put on a register, her behaviour is excused because she was emotional. And we can't excuse domestic violence because of emotions. The whole paradigm is wrong. And I do agree with this guy. We need to acknowledge good and bad behaviours, and we reward the people that have good behaviours, and we help integrate the people that have bad behaviours. And then it's more about helping people get more better behaviours in society, as opposed to having this constant fight between the sexes, which is the distraction. It shouldn't be about that. The conversation shouldn't be about that, and that's what it is. The whole topic of this is, should there be a domestic violence register? You know, and it's all got into this debate about women abuse men and men abuse women and blah blah blah.
Mark, what happened to you a few years ago with an ex-wife?
Can I ask this lady?
Let me ask you this, because you told me earlier on.
Can I ask the lady, and I'll tell you.
Right.
Would you put me on the register for poking my partner on the arm?
Well,
yes.
She loves it. Look at her. She's like, ooh, a poke, ooh, you violent man. I'm a victim now. Woo! You physically touch me.
Well, explain what you mean.
Yes or no?
Explain what you mean.
20 years ago, I poked my partner on the arm. It went to court, and I was found guilty by a magistrate, not a jury, of assault. I'll tell you the consequences of that. I had to have supervised access to my son. A little social worker sitting in the background with a clipboard, how I interact with my son for 6 weeks. Then, because of her taking advantage of the situation and exaggerating that I'm a wife beater, I didn't see my son for 13 years.
Was she bruised?
She was no injury whatsoever. It was common assault. So you're saying you take it further than that, and I get more punishment, yeah?
She had no bruise at all?
No injury at all. There was maybe a slight red mark, which was marked, but it was thrown out of court. A common assault. I poked her on the arm in an argument about access to my son. I didn't see my son for 13 years. I went and seen him on his 16th birthday, and it's been very, very difficult ever since. I deserve that?
I am delighted to answer you.
Oh, look at it. She's loving it. She's loving it. This is... Oh, she gets to bathe in the victimisation now.
It is very, very difficult to get a conviction for any kind of domestic violence in court. And so...
one incident, one complaint...
And all men who abuse women minimise it.
All men that abuse women minimise it. So if you poke somebody, which I don't actually agree with, I don't think you should have done. There's no reason to ever poke it. I've never poked anybody. It's not my thing. But it's not hitting somebody, chopping somebody's hand off, is it? It's not smacking them around the face, is it? It's that's another thing as well. When you've got this, you know, when people are kinky in the bedroom, it's sort of like, well, he hit me. Well, she liked it. She liked being smacked on the arse.
And they all say things like it was only a poke. It was only a slap.
One complaint, one incident.
So I've listened to what you've said.
Do I deserve to be on it?
I know the court system, and I know the legal system.
She knows the court system. She knows the legal system. So you know how you can have like different solicitors and all that saying you shouldn't have more than one because of conflicting advice. Because not everybody, you talk to a really good solicitor, they're not 100% sure. There's always that bit of uncertainty. But she knows. And it's not, and there's several courts, and they all intertwine with each other. But she knows, and she's now going to make her judgment.
And my knowledge of the legal system is, can I say, you got convicted? You were convicted.
Did my son deserve 13 years not seeing his father for that reason?
Okay, let's hear. You've had your hand up for ages.
She doesn't have to answer the question. Notice how she never actually answers a question.
I was going to say that if a man is put onto the register.
Again, notice how everybody's talking about men being put on the register. Again, the whole conversation's been directed away from the fact of if someone is put on the register, because it could be a man or a woman. I mean, especially in homosexual relationships where you've got two guys or you've got two women. How are you going to identify it in a lesbian relationship if you're going to base it purely on sex?
For a couple of instances, then say for example we rehabilitate this person, and he's seen the problem, what he's done. He's seen that he's done something bad, and he sees that he doesn't want to do anything like that anymore. and he wants to change, will he still be on that register, even though he says that he's changed? I'm not condoning anything like that because I think it's disgusting, but I'm just saying, will they be stuck on it?
Notice how he uses the word disgusting. I've used the word disgusting several times because there's something really distasteful about all this. There's something that goes against the human soul. It's something you can't quite put your finger on. There's something really sinister that's going on here with this whole domestic abuse, all women are victims, believe all women and all men should be gotten rid of argument. It's very inhumane.
Domestic violence is obviously, it's an abhorrent crime. There's no doubt about that. Nobody here is saying domestic violence is a good thing. However, the register would actually potentially erode some very fundamental civil liberties that we have. And we do that, I think...
I don't have to worry about civil liberties.
very much at our peril. And I just want to say that the latest statistics that I've seen, of course it's statistics down statistics, but...
But why should men have civil liberties if their ex-partner doesn't like them? Oh, I can't stand her.
One woman every 3 days, one man every 10 days is killed by their partner or their ex-partner. So it isn't just an issue that divides down the gender lines. It is across, it's no respecter of anything or anyone, anybody, bless you, anybody can suffer from domestic violence.
And yes, it is higher for women deaths than for men deaths. But I think we've just had a wonderful example here of another form, and very important form, of domestic abuse, of denial of seeing one's children for 13 years. Now, that really isn't regarded by the courts as any matter for prosecution. Yet I think most of us who've experienced that kind of thing would say it's the worst possible thing that anybody could do to me. And one statistic that isn't looked at when you talk about the body count is that so many men are driven to suicide when they lose touch with their children, when they're denied reasonably a relationship with their children. The male suicides are triple female suicides. This is happening time and time again within Fathers for Justice.
Very quickly.
We find this all the time.
The reason why I make these videos, there's many reasons. One is because that children don't have a voice. The second is because that people that are committing crimes and they're being excused by the family courts and they're being allowed to get away with them because the criminal court and the family court conflict with each other over definitions. And the third one is to raise awareness to men that have been victims of this reputation destruction by the family court and other people in society that say all men are evil and they need to be gotten rid of. And they're looking for any excuse they can find to get rid of them so that they can get what they want. I want men to know that you don't have to do anything. Because a lot of men feel guilty. Oh, I poked her on the arm. Oh, I swore at her in front of the children. Oh, this, that, the other. I'm telling you now, you don't have to do anything in order to be seen as a perpetrator of domestic abuse while actually being the victim of it. I want men to stop killing themselves. I want men to know that they're worthwhile, that there are people there that they're not deserved of what's happened to them if they've been through the family court system. You don't have to poke somebody on the arm. They can just find you annoying, and the same thing probably would have still happened. There doesn't need to be any physical contact because it's all based on emotion. And it's based on molestation, which again doesn't involve touch molestation. It's interesting, isn't it? Because when you think of the word molestation, you think of being groped and molested. But no, molestation doesn't mean molestation in a family court. In fact, it'd be very difficult to find out what it actually does mean because they're very loose on the old definitions so that more people can apply.